Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. Last week we put together the end panel with the fridge, which means this week we're going to start at step 16, the rear doors. First we get to open another bag of goodies. This one's for steps 16 and 17. There's the long locking pins for the door, lots of hinge parts, and of course the short locking pins too. The rest is the usual mix of nuts and bolts. To make up the side bits of what's going to end up being the panel, we need to collect up a few bits. We need 2 Y8s, 2 bits of aluminium angle. These ones have 2 extra pairs of holes over the front panel ones for the hinges. And there's this steel strip with offset holes that make up the lip on one of the doors. For screws we need 12 M2x6s plus 8 more M2x6s. There's actually a sticker over a shorter screw changing it to this one. 4 M2x10s and 24 M2 nuts. And from the pot we'll also need the 4 hinge pins, which can go straight into the hinges. They're a friction fit, but they're not the tightest. We'll have to keep an eye on them to see if they stay put. If they do start working their way out, all we need to do is very lightly squeeze up one end of the hinge to grab the pin. The aluminium side bits need the plastic Y8s fitting using a pair of M2x10s and nuts. Just like the ones on the front panel, these are there to give the side panel something to lock into. Since these won't need to come off again, we might as well use some thread lock to make them permanent. They don't need to be super tight, just bottom them out, then with a cross wrench give them a little extra nip. If we hold the left door up to the aluminium, it's pretty obvious where the hinges need to go. To fit them we'll start on the aluminium side, using an M2x6 and a nut per hole. These will need some thread lock, but for now we'll leave them so they're just a little bit loose, so we can square everything up before the final tightening. The hinges mount to the door next, again using M2x6s and some more nuts. Keep them all a little bit loose, and when we're done we have a working door. Amazing stuff. Not too surprisingly at this stage the other door is all but a mirror image of the first. So here it is, almost complete as far as step 16 goes. The only difference between the doors are the extra holes along one edge, which is where the steel strip goes. It gets fitted with the remaining M2x6s and nuts. The holes in the strip are off centre, so make sure the strip ends up proud of the door. If it's the wrong way round and it sits almost flush, it will get in the way of some of the other bits we're going to fit in the next step. With the 2 doors hung on their hinges, we can move on to step 17, completing the panel. And since a bag of screws only covers steps 16 and 17, we should be able to tip out all the bits from the pot and sort them to have everything ready. There's 20 M2x6s, 2 really coarse 3x12 self-tappers, 4 2x8 self-tappers, 8 M2x10s, and we're going to need the locking pins as well. For the plastic we've got 2 Y5s, 2 Y2s, 2 Y3s, 2 Y13s, a handful of Y7s, and 2 pairs of corner boxes. Right, I think first we'll get the top and bottom bits ready. They're both the same and rather similar to the ones from the fridge panel. There's only 2 of the short aluminium bits left, so it's easy to tell which ones we need. A Y5 goes on the back, lining up with the 2 holes near the middle. On the front we need a Y3 and 2 2x8 self-tappers to hold it all together. This makes up the support for the top and bottom panel, and the holes for the locking pin to drop into. Next we can finish up one of the doors. They're both the same for this step, they're just a mirror image, one with a steel strip, but that doesn't affect the locking pins. With the pins sat on the doors, long strip at the top and short at the bottom, it becomes fairly obvious which holes do what. The holes between them are for the twist lock, and the ones that make up the pairs are for the Y7s. To fit the Y7s we need lots of M2x6s and M2 nuts. This is another case of working our way along, installing the screws and nuts with just a little tiny bit of tension, so when we've got everything else put together we can nip them up with the correct alignment. There's quite a few to do, but before you know it we have the pins installed. Next is a twist lock that sits between them. Start with Y2 and pop it through the large hole. Insert one of the coarse self-tappers and hold it in position. Flip the door over and thread on a Y13 on the back. Y13 has a hex shape moulded into it, so you can use the little cross wrench to keep hold of it while you do up the screw. The shape of the parts give a little bit of clearance for it to freely rotate, so we can bottom out the screw and not worry too much about any binding. When Y2 is horizontal, the locking pins come together and should clear the top and bottom rails, allowing the door to open. When you twist it to vertical, it should lock the pins into the rails, keeping the door shut. That's the theory anyway. That just leaves the last bit to complete the frame. Just like the other end, we use the neat little corner boxes. This time though, they don't fit directly against the aluminium. Each screw, an M2x10, needs a Y14 plastic spacer. The easiest way to fit them is to pop a screw through the aluminium, drop a spacer on the threads while holding it in position, then offer up the corner box and do up the screw. We want to keep them just a little bit loose until they're all fitted so we can square it all up. When it's all put together, close the doors and lock them shut, hold the corners tight and start nipping up all the screws. When it's all nice and tight, the panels are ready to fit. The doors open and close nicely. The locking system works fairly well. It should hold the door shut quite nicely. And on to step 18 and another big bag of bits. This one covers step 18 to 22. For a start, we can filter out all the little bent metal mounts. Hercules call them frame stays. For this step, we're going to need 4 of them. For screws, there's 3 M2x6s, 10 M3x10s, 10 M3 plain nuts, and 6 M3 nylocks. For plastics, there's 2 Y4s, 2 Y11s, and a Y10. We need 2 of the long aluminium angled bits, and the large sheet that ends up being the base of the box. There's not too much to assemble here, then there's quite a bit of repetition. The build on the floor is broken up between step 18 and 19, roughly 1/2 each. First, to make the sheet a bit more stable, we'll fit the aluminium angle. The end for the step 18 is the end with the 6 large holes in the sheet. The angle sits underneath and should have a set of holes that line up with holes along the edge of the sheet. To hold it on, we pop an M2x6 from the underside and thread it into one of the steel angled bits. There's not a whole lot of thread in them, so be very careful not to over tighten and strip the thread. And at this stage we only really want to do them up just tight enough that they start to grab, as they'll need to move around a bit when the side panels slot in. Next we've got these U-shaped plastic parts. The bottom one's easy to fit. It just needs 2 M3 screws and 2 plain nuts. The screw goes in through the bottom of the panel, through the plastic, and into the nut that sits in a nice little hex-shaped hole. Couldn't be easier. The other one is almost the same, except this time we need to drop 2 M3 nylocks into the hex holes in the bottom of the part. They want to go in with a nylon towards the top surface. When it's fitted, they line up with 2 holes in the aluminium panel for parts of the coupling mechanism to mount to. Other than that, it's the same as the other one though. 2 M3 screws and plain nuts. Nip them up and it's fitted. The plastic rails are rather similar. There's 2 types. The Y11s have hex-shaped holes in the middle on their underside for a couple of nylocks. It's easy to see where they go, as there's 4 holes across the panel. Just like the U-shaped ones, the rails get fitted to the panel with M3 screws and plain nuts on the top. There's 2 Y11s at this end, so we can repeat the operation for this one. The nylocks on these end up being the mounting points for the chassis, so you really don't want to miss one. The other rail type, Y10, is almost the same, but without the spaces for the nylocks. So they just get fitted directly to the panel with M3 screws and plain nuts. And with that installed, we're on to step 18, which is pretty much the same. We've got 6 M2x6s, 10 M3x10s, 10 M3 plain nuts, 6 M3 nylocks, and 6 of the steel angled bits. For plastics, we've got 2 Y10s, 2 Y11s, and a single Y9. Now, we could go through and repeat what we've already been through, install the Y10s and 11s, but I think we know how to handle them now. So here's the complete panel, and very nice it is too. There's not much flex left in it. The only difference with this and the previous step is the part Y9, but in reality it's pretty much the same as the Y11s with the nylocks. It's just a little bit narrower. So that just leaves one more bit to do, and that's fit the plastic floor. It does have a right way round, so compare it with the manual to see which end the notch goes. We're going to be sticking it down with double-sided tape, so it needs to be right first time. And speaking of double-sided tape, we're going to be using some more of that stuff the kit came with. So far the bits we've used it on seem to be well stuck, with no signs of anything dropping off, so I think it's doing its job. We need to stick some along the tops of all the plastic bits on the aluminium panel. It doesn't matter if they're not all perfect, as long as there's a good length on them, and they're not overhanging the sides too much. Peel off the backing and carefully put the plastic floor in position. The tape doesn't seem to grab too much until it's pressed down, so there's a little leeway for positioning. It should fit between the steel angled bits along the sides, and the holes at the end should line up with the holes in the plastic parts. When it's spot on, work your way along, pressing it down onto the tape. Not only does it look a lot better than rails, but it makes for a very rigid structure, and it's not all that heavy too. Very nice. And since that's a complete sub-assembly, I think that's a good time to end. We managed to get through 4 complete steps. Well, we did kind of skip through a lot of step 19 due to repetition, but 4 steps is 4 steps. So thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you fancy it, and comment if you got something on your mind. Bye guys!